Hello and good day, Welcome to the Super Good Camping Podcast. My name is Pamela.
I'm Tim.
And we are from supergoodcamping.com. We are here because we're on a mission to inspire other people to get outside and enjoy outdoor adventures as such as we have as a family. Today's guest is an icon of the wilderness canoeing and camping community. He has authored over 20 books, is a retired biology and environmental science teacher. He has worked with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources on such things as outdoor ethics and map and compass curriculum. He has been a contributing editor for Canoe and Kayak magazine and a consultant to the Boy Scouts of America. He has spent about 30 years outfitting and guiding large canoe trips here in the Great White North, a number of them well above the Arctic Circle. Please welcome a recipient of the Legends of Paddling Award and a member of the American Canoe Association's Hall of Fame, Cliff Jacobson. Welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for dropping by.
Pretty impressive.
Oh, well, my pleasure. My pleasure. It looks like our canoeing season's about over now, doesn't it? Especially up where you guys are.
Yeah, well, it's dropped down. We started out the day at 2 degrees Celsius this morning, so it's getting pretty crisp out there.
You know, I still can't think in Celsius. I taught environmental science and biology for years and years. So 2 degrees Celsius probably has to be about, 36 Fahrenheit, something?
35, 36. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So all I remember is 37 degrees is body temperature.
Yeah.
98.6 Fahrenheit, something like that.
Right,
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know. We just can't seem to get it together here in the U.S. on this metric system. I just don't understand the stupidity of this. Because, in school, they teach kids the English system, and then they teach them the metric system. Well, they don't understand the English system to begin with, okay? So then they're supposed to, in their mind, convert to metrics, okay? But you can't do back and forth. You got to really think in one system or another. So what we have, if you walk through any school in the United States and you ask the typical, say, 8th or ninth grader, how many pints in a quart, they won't know. How many quarts in a gallon? Maybe half of them will know. If you ask them how many centimeters in a meter, they don't have a clue. They can't get it through their head that centi means 1/100. Okay? So it's just stupid, But I suppose by the same token, we have a weird dichotomy here because every time I go to Canada, I'm still driving in miles, aren't I? Isn't it miles? It's still miles in Canada.
Up here, no, it's kilometers, but we have our speed gauges have both miles and kilometers on it, so we can go everywhere.
Yeah, that's probably what they should do here. But you know what? I think nobody wants to pay for the new signs. I think that's the deal. But
Well, we still talk about our weight in pounds, and our weight and our height in 6'2" or whatever.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we're a bit mixed too.
Yeah, that's right. But hey, guys, it's good to be with you guys.
Yeah, awesome. So what have you been doing lately?
Well, regrettably, my trips in northern Canada are done now. I just can't do those long, tough portages anymore. I'm 84. What do you expect? But I can still paddle fine around home. I did learn an interesting lesson this year paddling. You do lose certain things as you age. I was a pretty good whitewater paddler when I was younger. I paddled C1s and wore the wetsuit, the whole bit. And then, of course, as I got older, I got a lot more careful because you're doing these trips in northern Canada, and if you crash and burn, helps an airplane right away. So there's a little local river by our house, and it's a Class 1 trout stream. It's about 10 miles of solid rapids. I mean, nothing's very big. It's riffles. It's Class 1. It might hit low Class 2 at some point. But there's a lot of debris in it, especially in the spring. And I've done this river, I would say conservatively 100 times over the years in my solo canoe. So what happened? There was a lot of debris when we were this last trip we went down it. And so I ferried to the inside shore. The river's quite narrow. At this point, the river is probably maybe 50 feet wide. And there's a tree across it, but there's a little hole just right of center. So I said, I can do. So I stopped there, first of all, and I was exactly where I needed to be because I was on a left little beach, and it's all I had to do. I had to get out of the canoe and drag it maybe 25 yards. Just drag it. There was enough water to just drag it. But that meant I had to get out of the canoe. So I said to myself, I don't want to get out of my canoe. I can do this. So all I have to do is all I need to do is I need to back up, then ferry the river right, and I can get into this slot, and I can make it under the tree. So I backed up, started ferrying the river right, and I didn't make it. And I capsized.
Oh.
And the canoe, the solo canoe, and the canoe, it's a little light Kevlar solo canoe. So the canoe capsized, belly up right against this tree, and so I'm down there and pulling it belly up, okay? And a guy alongshore came, kayaker behind me, who ironically, he had capsized earlier and I helped him. He came out and he helped me, got the thing up, and I got back in it. But then I started thinking, I've done this river 100 times, literally 100 times. And this is a maneuver I've done thousands of times. But for some reason, I didn't have the power to exactly put it where I wanted to be. And the only reason why I did that was because I didn't want to get out of my canoe. In other words, I'd done it correctly. I just didn't want to get out of my canoe and drag it 25 easy yards. Okay? So I learned a lesson. And the lesson is you have to, as you age and you start finding some of these problems, you have to learn what you can't do anymore. And I also learned from some previous trips, this had been coming at me, is that I can do the same maneuvers I did before. And I'm still pretty good at it because, if you're a good paddler, it's really not about strength. It's about precision and knowing where to put that boat. And so I learned that now I have to start things a little bit earlier than I thought. In other words, if I'm going to start a ferry, I need a couple seconds more. If I'm going to do a snappy eddy turn, I need to get into that eddy just a little bit earlier. So, these are some of the things, that I learned in life. But but I have another interesting story to go with it. I don't know but you can always edit it out. When I first started doing this stuff, I was like 30 years old. I mean, when I started doing it seriously. Before that, it was Boy Scouts and local little rivers and things. And I built my first wood strip solo canoe, which ultimately became a canoe called the Old Town bought it first, and it was called the Old Town CJ Solo. They pretty much wrecked it by taking the rocker out of it and plumbing the stems. They destroyed the boat. But then later, I got the plug from them, and Ted Bell built Canoe Works, which became North Star, built it as the North Star CJ, and that's really one of the prime canoes that started off the Bell Company. And so here I was paddling my little wood strip solo canoe in there was a rapid on the St. Croix River. This is in Minnesota. This is about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from my house. And it's right below a dam. And it's a long section of big water class 2 stuff. Okay? But there's not much in it in terms of rocks and things. So worst is going to happen is you're probably going to capsize and float down. So I was doing eddy turns and peel outs and just having fun. And they were putting up a slalom course with the gates. Okay, they were going to use it as a whitewater national qualifying course. So I'm playing around, and then I put ashore, and this young woman, whose name I remember after Well, it was just 50 years ago. Her name was Kristen Frisch. I still remember. She had red hair, cutie pie. And she was competing in this thing. And so she says, you know, Cliff, she says, I've been watching you paddle. She says, you know, you're pretty good. She said, she said, I've entered this in solo, but I would also like to enter tandem. She says, but I don't have anybody to practice with. She said, would you go for a run with me through the gates? I said, yeah, sure. I said, you know, I can't roll. She says, well, we're not rolling. We're just going to do the gate thing. I said, okay. So I was paddling bow. She was paddling stern. And, hey, we did fine through the gates. So afterwards, she puts ashore and a big grin on her face. And she says, Cliff, you know, she says, you're pretty good at this. Why don't you enter, why don't you enter this event? And I looked at her and I said, well, you know, Chris, I don't know. You know, paddling this big water like this kind of freaks me out a little. And she looked at me, and I'll never forget. She looked at me. She says, Cliff, you have more skill than you have guts. And you know what? I value that. That is exactly what has kept me safe on all these northern Canadian rivers. More skill than guts. Because if you go the other way, that's when you die. So I think that's just a great story to share with people.
Absolutely.
You know. In fact, and that, you know, on that same line, though, you know, people will ask, I'm going on a big trip in Canada, and, you know, I got a couple guys or whatever, gals or whatever, want to go with me. What's the most important thing that you want to have with your partner? And they're expecting me to say, got to be a great whitewater paddler. Got to be a super camper. No. Got to be a nice person. Because you know what? You can train a nice person, but if you have a real jerk, that person will destroy your trip. I've been there.
Yep.
You know. So, in fact, we had one guy, I'll never forget, I'll say his name. He was a terrible paddler. And he'd been on a lot of my trips. He could never get it. There are a few people who just can't get it. And they were always getting in trouble when he was paddling. But he was such a nice guy. He was so courteous. He was so fun in camp that we'll just put up with him, you know? So there you have it.
Well, and there's a good segue. When you were doing guiding trips up here, did you have like a sweet spot of the number of people that you were guiding for, or did you do like a whole variety of different, come up with 3 people or come up with 10 people? How did that work out for you?
No, yeah, the sweet spot is paying the bills and making a profit. And that turns out to be 9 people. Why? 8 people. What am I thinking? I was thinking like boundary water. That turns out to be eight people. Okay, I did 10 once, but that's too many. But 8 pays for eight will pay for the airplane, and a lot of our trips use real expensive airplanes, long flights, you know. So once with one of our trips, it was a 400 air miles in. Okay, so you know, unfortunately, you can't do it for less than 8 people. I mean, if you're running a program where you got to pay the bills and you got to pay the guide. And right now it's even more expensive than that because now you got to have insurance. See, I did all these trips before they had all these rules and stuff. You got to have insurance, and insurance is thousands of dollars a year. So, you know, nobody's hardly doing these trips anymore because you can't. It's not profitable. You know, but I mean, if you want to talk about trips, you know, I'm trying to put this politically correct. Okay. The thing is there's one. I think there's one, maybe 2 major canoe tripping companies in Canada. Okay? There are none that I know of in the United States. I mean, there are some that do some local stuff, or they'll do going down the Rio Grande or the Snake River out west or something like that. But there are only two. But when I was leading trips, I didn't think it was an issue because even though we were coming from the States, we dropped a lot of money in Canada. I mean, we had one air bill alone was $21,000. And this was 20 years ago, okay? And then we had the motels, and then people would go into Yellowknife and they'd spend another $500 or $1,000 on stuff. So we left plenty of money in Canada. But then what happened was we pretty got ruled out of running trips in Canada without a Canadian guide. That was the issue. You had to have a Canadian guide. But what actually happens when you require something like that is two things. Number one, if you have a Canadian guide, the people who are signing up here in the U.S., they don't know that person, okay? They want to go with somebody they know and trust. Now, this doesn't mean that Canadian guide isn't excellent. He or she probably is. But Americans don't know him, okay? So as a result, they may not sign up, okay? So that's the first thing. So if you do a trip like this where they go with an American guide and also a Canadian guide, which can be done, I've done it that way, then what happens is the money pot gets fractionated out to where nobody gets much out of this, see? So now actually what's happened with there's some strange things I think that are actually been happening in Canada as far as trips for foreigners is concerned. One of them is the guide license. Now, the way it's you apply for a guide license on a river, say you want to do in Canada. I did this once just to try it, and here's how it works out. I can't even remember the river I applied for, but it was one of the subarctic rivers that flowed into the ocean. And so I waited for about 6 weeks, and I called them on the phone, and they said, "Well, I'm sorry, your permit hasn't been processed yet because what it has to do." It has to go to every indigenous village along that river
Right. Yep.
and be okayed by each one. That's a tall thing to ask because maybe you got a half a dozen of native communities. So it goes to one native community, and those guys are all out caribou hunting, and they don't get to it for a week or two. Who knows? And then when they get to it, maybe they pass it on, maybe they don't. Or maybe the guy says, "Hey, I got a couple of Coleman canoes here that I can rent them." No, they're not using their boats, they're going to use mine. Or maybe it goes through 2 or 3 approval and the 4th one doesn't. In the meantime, you're sitting back here trying to plan a trip. So the net effect of this is it sounds real good, but it becomes impossible. So what happened with me, after 6 weeks, I called. They said they're still working on this. Okay, about 2 months later, I called them again. Still didn't have it. And they said, I'll never forget the voice on the end of the phone. I said, what was that river? I can't remember which one it was. And they said, oh, well, we have it here for the back river. I said, well, I didn't ask for a permit on the back. Oh, well, I guess maybe there was a mistake at our end. I said, well, you know what? It's too late now. I can't run this trip. I said, we're within about 6 weeks of flying out of there. So there's some things that don't work very well. I mean, of course, there's another thing that doesn't work very well that Kevin and I have talked about for a long, long time. You know, Kevin really is the guy who knows what's going on out there, okay? not the people who manage those wilderness areas. Because, and I can say this with some authority because I have a degree in forestry. I used to work as a forester out in the big timber country of Oregon. I know those guys. They're wonderful people. They really are. They wouldn't have gone into this if they weren't wonderful people. But you know what? Most of them don't spend serious time in the woods. Most of them want to camp out in motels or pickup trucks. All right? They're not thinking the way we wilderness people think. And one of the things that they're not thinking about is this Crown land camping fee in Ontario, which we have lots of stories about, okay? One of which was Gary McGuffin at one time told me that he had some friends from Germany or something who came over. He wanted to take them on a canoe trip, and they got busted or something. They didn't have a permit for them. I forget what the deal was. Kevin agrees with me on this. So the problem with this Crown land camping thing is it applies only to foreigners. Okay? Doesn't apply to anybody else. And you know, it's not a matter of paying a fee. It's a matter of it's a nightly charge, first of all. So every day you say, okay, you're coming into Ontario. How long are you going to canoe these rivers? I would maybe say 12 days. Okay, so they give me a certificate for 12 days, whatever the case might be. But if I say 13, I'm in violation. Now, first of all, that violates what wilderness travel is all about. That puts a ding in the freedom to travel. Okay? That's the first thing that it does. The second thing is Ontario doesn't get much money out of it. Not from canoeists. They probably get plenty of money from power boaters, but they don't get much from canoeists because we have a little deal that we get going here. And the little deal looks like this. If you're flying in, you're taking an airplane from someplace. That's an outfitting service. Or you can just go to an outfitter. We've done this many times. You go to them and you say, I'd like you to rent me a tent for the 2 weeks that I will be there. I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $500. I'll give you $500 if you'll rent me a tent. Okay, I don't want the tent. Just give me the certificate that says I rented the tent. They do that. Now, if I get stopped, I will show them the certificate and I'm fine. Why? Because renting shelter qualifies as under the permit thing. So the result is the local outfitters, if you're knowledgeable paddler at all, this is how you do it. And if you're a knowledgeable outfitter, why would you say no? Because all you got to do is say a certificate and you made some bucks. So it's the people who wind up paying this are really the rule that's put in place, I think, to tame the bad habits of fishermen who show up in these big RVs and stay for a week and are not very environmentally conscious for much of the. That's fine. They're in motorized vehicles. But the other thing that happens is this: it's an environmental thing. There's been so many trips in Ontario I've done where we've come into a camp that has been trashed by fishermen, and we've cleaned it up. We've disassembled furniture that they built, threw it back in the woods, got rid of it. We do that because it's the right thing to do. But what happened then with the Crown land camping fee changes something in your mind. You come to a campsite where there's trash, and instead of picking it up, you say, you know what? I had to pay $14 a night to be here. Let them come in and do it.
Pick it up themselves.
This is a bad example to set. And that's why I say the people who are making those rules are not serious, don't spend enough time in the woods. They might say they do, but there's a reason why guys like Kevin and I are so opposed to this, okay? Oh well, I'm sorry about that rant.
Absolutely not. That's one of the things I love about you is you're quite happy if you have an opinion about something, you just let her go. So I'm good with that. That's just fine.
Well, I wish we
It
had Kevin on the show because we would have a good time together. You know.
Well, you know what? So just to put it out there now, because we're a shorter format than a lot of shows that are out there, we won't be able to discuss all the things that I would want to talk to you about. So
Okay.
we'll get you to come back again, and we'll bring Kevin at the same time, and
That'd be
that'll be a
great.
fun one.
It will be a
That'd be
hoot.
great.
I think that'll
Yeah,
be a
listen,
lot.
I'm sorry I went into those rants like that. I shouldn't have done that.
Absolutely not. No,
You know.
that's
I don't know
that's
what
good.
yeah, I just don't know what prompted that, but I know maybe just looking back over the years and seeing how things were and how they are now. Um, you know, but,
No, it's fine.
well, we could.
One of my favorite things was again, I couldn't tell you. It was after a canoe show on your side of the border. You and Kevin and a couple other gentlemen were sitting in a motel room, and you went off about whether to hang your barrels or not. And it wasn't particularly long. I would say it's like 5 minutes or something. But that's one of my favorite. I love that video just because you're like it's 15 feet. Now that's only 14 feet 9 inches. That's not acceptable. It was perfect. It was perfect.
Well, you've heard, about the new rule and that new rule in the boundary room. You know, but the Forest Service I just saw something recently. They're real happy. They're bragging. They said they only had 10 bear incidents this year, when usually they have about 40 per year, and they're attributing it to the new food law. I'm not sure. One of the things they said was, they had a lot of rain this year, and we had good berry crops and things. You don't just look at one year when it goes down and say, but my view on that is I think what's actually going to happen is this. Uh, People are going to use those bear resistant containers, and they're going to say, hey, it's resistant. I'm not worried about it. They're just going to stick it right out in the middle of camp somewhere. And there's still plenty of odor. That's what's, drawing these animals in. And they're going to get bears, and they're still going to get bears in camp. And they're eventually a smart one's going to figure out how to get into one, and then it'll be history. But anyway, that's a subject for another time, and we can talk about that.
It's fine. I can't. We will talk about it. I can't say I disagree with you. I have historically always hung my barrels simply because somebody at some point said that's what you do, so that's what you do. But I know that our eldest son and I did a trip on the French River, and that we found at least 3 sites where hanging wasn't an option. There was no point. There wasn't a tree that was big enough, didn't have a long enough branch, or would support the weight of our barrel. So it's like, you know what? I'm going way the heck back there, and I'm going to put the barrel there, and hopefully it won't be ripped open in the morning. That's how that's going to work.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it's a very simple. I mean, if a bear can't see your food or smell your food, he's not going to get your food. Now, these bear-resistant containers people get, that has nothing to do with odors. They got to build an odor-proof system into that thing if they want to. Otherwise, they got the same odors they had before. So they are going to get animals in camp that way. Now, whether the bear can take it apart or not is another point. He may just drag it off somewhere, but it's like people don't get it. I mean, if you canoe you get into northern Ontario, the trees are getting pretty tiny. You get into Saskatchewan, they're getting really tiny. You hit the Northwest Territories or none of it, goodbye trees, period. So, there's bears there too. Gee, how come we don't have problems there? We must be doing something right. I mean, I've been doing this for over 50 years. I've never had a bear problem. I've had a lot of bears in camp. Okay. I talked to a lot of bears. I've never had a bear get a single bit of my food in 50 years of camping at canoe. Neither is Rob Kesselring. So the people who've spent tremendous amount of time out there don't have problems. So the question they really ought to be asking is, why don't they have problems? Instead, what the feds do is they make a law. Making a law will fix everything. God forbid we'd have some education here. Okay, nobody wants to teach anybody how to do anything. What they want to do is either make a law, okay, or give them a piece of equipment will fix their problem. That's my view. Sorry, that was another rant again.
That's the best part.
So a lot of bears in camp. I'm curious about variety of bears. Like we get like black bears,
Black
brown
bears.
bears.
Yep.
Yeah, you've encountered other types, I assume.
Well, you mean what kind of bears? I've had all of them. Black bears, grizzlies, once 13 polar bears going across
Oh,
the shore. That was interesting.
jeez.
Been chased across the river twice by a polar bear. Black bears use when you get away from civilization. I call it civilization. Like the boundary waters is civilization. Quetico, to a degree, is civilization. People think that if a feather falls from a tree, a bear can smell it a mile away. No, come on. What happens is on any lake where there's a lot of canoeists, okay, you're going to have bears around. Some of those bears might be, I don't know, maybe hundreds of yards away, quarter mile away. You think they're smelling your freeze-dried chicken tetrazzini a quarter mile away? No, they're smelling you. We stink. They've learned that where there are people, there's food. It's as simple as that. So they're going to go to a campsite that's occupied, and then they're going to look around and they're going to see what they can find. Now, if they can't smell any food or see your food, because they've learned that food comes in certain things. They've learned it comes in packs, barrels, okay, tin cans. They've learned that bears from the dump the first time they bite into a tin can. I've seen them bite open. I've seen them in the old days. I've seen them bite open film cans because it's a canister. I've seen them take apart packs that never had any food in them at all. Okay, because the problem with bears are people cannot comprehend that we have an animal that is extremely smart. So smart, it can teach their children. Seriously. You guys must be familiar with that the true story about the yellow bear in the Adirondacks? Are you familiar with that?
Is that where
Okay.
the mama figured out how to get into a barrel and then taught her kids?
Yeah, it wasn't a barrel. It was a government approved bear can. I have one downstairs. It's called the Bear Vault 500.
Right.
Okay. She learned to get into that and then told all of her friends. Pretty soon, every bear in the Adirondacks could open the thing. So they contacted Bear Vault and they said, we need an improvement. Their improvement was a second latch that was similar to the first one, but it was a double latch. She figured that one out in about a day and again told all of her friends. Now, she obviously was a genius bear, but I'm sure there are other genius bears. But just for interest, when I do my bear show, that's probably my most popular show that I do is my bear show. I have a Bear Vault 500. And in that Bear Vault, I put an autograph book. And the instructions for opening it are on the top of the Bear Vault. So I cover that with tape. And then I tell people, I say, I'm going to pass this out to the audience. And you can spend about a minute or so playing with it. And if you can't figure it out, send it on to the next one. I said, the instructions are at the top, but I've covered them because bears can't read. Okay? And so usually what happens is with adults, it goes to around a dozen people before they can open it. And then whoever opens it gets the book. With teenagers, It's the first three. So that's probably from, we say about this business, about being on, playing these video games and stuff. That's probably why they're able to do this so quickly. So it's not all bad, you know, but the point is that the average person, not given the directions, has a lot of trouble figuring out how to open this thing. And this bear could figure it out. So people just don't give these animals enough credit. They think they're stupid. They're not. I think some of these bears are actually smarter than some people.
I'm positive you're right on that one.
Yeah. So.
Well,
Anyway. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Speaking of books, you autographed book. I was kind of going through the list of your books. Do you have a favorite one, or do you have like a couple that you really are really proud of, or you know what I mean? Like that you really enjoyed doing?
Yeah. Canoeing Wild Rivers is by far my favorite. And I would say you'll never see another book like that again. For a lot of reasons. One of them is hardly anybody does what I did. Nobody does that anymore now. Now they go to parks or they canoe for a few days. I mean, a 2-week canoe trip is like, nobody does this anymore. And there's another reason too, which is a little obscure that nobody would ever think of anymore. But at least in this country, we are so Sioux conscious that everybody's got to be protected from everything. I know it's a lot like that in Canada, but I don't think it's quite as bad. So here's actually kind of what is happening now. Let's say Tim, you decide you have a bunch of photos that you've taken over the years of canoeing and so forth. And then somebody comes to you one day and says, Tim, we'd like you to write a book on canoeing. You say, oh, that's great. I got all these photos from all these years. And then you get a little note back from the publisher that says, you need 2 things. Number one, you need a photographer credit for every photo. Oh, that's no problem. I took them all. Okay. But you also need a model credit. Well, what does that mean? That means that you need to contact everyone in those photos and get their permission to use it in your book. And then you say, I don't even remember who half these people were. And that's where we are today. And that's why, like a book like Canoeing Wild Rivers will probably never be able to be done, at least in the States again, because you don't have the photos. And you can't find these people. You don't know who they are. You never planned on writing a book in the first place. So it's plus anyway. That's my favorite. And I have some others that have done really much better in terms of the amount of money they made, like Knott's book. My publisher once told me, excuse me, said, Cliff, whenever we get a little tight for finances around here, we bring out another Knott book. Now, I don't know what it is with knots in people. I don't know why people think they need so many knots. Because, basically you need 3. You can go 4. You can argue for 5. Beyond that, you're never going to use them unless you're a rock climber or an old-time sailor. Otherwise you're never going to use them. You don't need them. But that seems to be what sells the best. But personally, my second favorite is my teen book, Justin Cody's Race to Survival. And I don't know if you have the time for me to tell you the story of that book, but maybe that you want me to. Yes, no.
Have at her.
All right. Well, you know what it looks like. Let me just grab one just to show you for just a second. That's what it looks like. Okay. All right. So, but a little bit of history. This was about 3 years ago. I started becoming. Am I in the right? going backwards. I started becoming concerned that there were no young people going to the wilderness. And I'd taken a lot of kids to the wilderness over the years. We had an outdoor program through our school. And so we took them to the Boundary Waters. We actually took them to some trips in Ontario. We took them down the Steel River in Ontario and the Kopka River in Ontario. We brought them in by train, via rail. We brought them in by float plane. It was great. I still have those kids are still in touch with me today. So I started thinking to myself, how do we get young people involved in the wilderness? You go like to the Boundary Waters, everybody's got gray hairs. No, we're not getting any young people involved, okay? And the thing is, kids don't know whether they like outdoors or not because they got their heads stuck in their iPads or phones all day long. They don't go outside. I got a grandson just like that. I love him, but he's just like that. So I decided I would try something unique. I'd always kind of wanted to write a teen book, but I decided what I was going to do was I was going to come up with a riveting high adventure novel that would drag them in. But really, I wanted it to be a how-to book in disguise, how to canoe, how to camp, okay, and so forth. So I thought it's going to be a how-to book because I said to myself, kids who like the outdoors, they're reading everything in print, just the outdoors, just like I did. But the ones that don't know if they like the outdoors, they'll love the high adventure story, okay? And they'll learn how to camp and canoe. So that's how I wrote this book. And it teaches them how to build, how to build a one-match fire, how to use a map and compass, how to rig a storm-proof camp. I mean, how survival stuff. And the list kind of goes on. So then I started saying to myself, I've written about 15 books or so. This should be easy, getting this thing published. Well, my publisher, Falcon, didn't even want to read it. So then I started sending it out. I made 40, I kept track of them, queries. Some went to fiction publishers, some went to nonfiction publishers. The nonfiction publishers came back and said, we don't publish fiction. The fiction publishers came back and said, we don't publish nonfiction. They couldn't see outside the box. Ultimately, the only one who was willing to publish it was some place in England that was a kind of vanity publisher. I said, no, I'm not paying you guys to publish my book. And so that was kind of the story on that. And right now, but it's a fast, riveting read. It's very much like I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Paulson. Gary Paulson wrote a book called Hatchet. Every young person, just about everybody's read Hatchet. When I was teaching environmental science during the winter, every Friday I would read a chapter from that book to the kids. They loved being read to. These were eighth graders. And it's the story of a kid who's divorced, parents, and he's flying to meet his father in someplace in Canada, and the plane crashes, and he has to survive off the land for a year or 6 months, something like that. Well, my book's a little bit in that vein, but it's quite a bit different. It involves, there's a grandpa involved, the kid's doing poor in school, he's failing 2 subjects. He has a grandpa who's a wilderness guru who makes a deal with the school that he'll take him on a month-long trip in Saskatchewan and straighten him out. And he can take pictures and write in his journal, and maybe they'll pass him then in English and social studies. And grandpa disappears along the line because there's a mysterious drone that runs on water that crashes, and there's a mafia involved, and it sort of goes on and on. But that's basically, kind of like the story. And I have a daughter, my daughter Clarissa. She's a screenwriter. She's got a movie in production now. She's written a short a short film called Lunch Ladies, which is probably one of the longest living shorts. She just wrote a screenplay on this, so hopefully she'll get the soul. I read the screenplay. It's awesome. Be a great movie for kids. But anyway, again, I didn't mean to ramble. I just get carried away on this stuff. So, but thanks for asking.
That's totally fine. um, this is excellent. This is what I basically live for. This is, other than like I have to do a job, but this is my favorite part of all the things that I do.
What do
Well,
you
other
do?
than
What do you do? What do you do for a living, Tim?
I'm a building manager, so as
A builder?
superintendent.
Oh, really? Okay. So that's because I know it's just looking. You got some pretty high tech equipment there. I can see those fancy microphones and things.
Oh
So
yeah,
you're really serious into this stuff, big time.
yes, not in a making a living off of it or anything. It costs us a
No, I
small
know, of course.
fortune to do, but we love doing it, man. Like this is,
And
It's our hobby.
yeah, this is the
do you,
best.
do you remember? Was it Mishner who said? Because this is the same thing with anybody who does art, which means writing, writing, speaking, music. He said, you can make a fortune writing, but you can't make a living.
That's a good quote.
You know, well,
Yeah.
I think it was him. I may be wrong, but yeah.
I seem to think I read somewhere that you're done writing. Are you going to continue to put out books or no?
No, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done with books. Yeah. Um, you can only. I said everything that I think I can say, and again, nobody takes camping seriously anymore. I mean, if the weather's bad, they just get in their Volvos and drive home. You know, um, when we did this stuff, you better know what you're doing, especially when you get above the tree line. You get winds of 50, 60 miles an hour and go for days. If you don't have everything really perfect, you can be in a lot of trouble. And that's really kind of the thing that people understand, because I get a lot of feedback from people about how they argue with me over the ground cloth inside the tent. They argue with me over the bear thing. So I like to tell them this little example. I like to say, let's say you have a friend who is a NASCAR race driver, okay? And you are in your 10-year-old Buick driving down the road, and he's sitting right next to you. And you start going around a curve, and you're going a little fast, so you hit the brakes. So your race car driver friend turns to you and he says, John, you don't want to do that. You don't want to hit your brakes in the middle of a curve. You want to brake before you go into a curve, and you want to accelerate out of a curve. And you turn to him kind of indignantly, and you say, look, I've been driving for 40 years. I've never had a problem. And then your friend turns to you and he says, try that at twice the speed. So I guess what I'm saying is, when you read these techniques in my book, Canoeing Wild Rivers, which, by the way, includes the input of about 30 other top shelf people, most of which I might add are Canadians, okay, you realize that there are certain things that you have to do just right when you're in a much more, I don't want to use the word savage environment. It's not savage, but when you're in a place where you screw up and you can die, okay?
Yeah, unforgiving
So
and an
that's
unforgiving.
unforgiving, yeah. So you got to prepare for that. But the problem is most of the people who question these ways, these recommendations, they've never gone twice the speed. They've been to the boundary waters. Maybe they've even been to Quetico. But if they paddle a technical class 2 rapid, they crash and burn. Okay? And in Canada, those are around every bend. And so are the 3s and the 4s and the 5s and the 6s. So you gotta know what you're doing, and 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 you can't get away with stuff that you can get away with in the boundary waters. But see, they haven't had that experience, so they don't know. So there you have it.
Yep. I hear you. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
think I'm a pretty decent canoeist, but I know what my limits are, and doing, class twos, threes, no, not this guy.
Well,
So
then you're like me. You have more skill than guts. But
more.
routinely, we'll. I'm sorry.
No.
No,
Yeah, you're right. More skill than guts for sure.
no, yeah. So I mean, routinely on trips in Canada, you're going to paddle class 3 a lot, and in northern Canada, you are. The alternative is you're going to be carrying that canoe a lot, and it's not necessarily going to be it's not going to be a groomed portage either. It can be really, really bad. So sometimes you can't line a canoe either. Sometimes you're in situations where you can't do that either. And sometimes, no matter how good you are, you just screw up. Um, and screw ups can be, I mean, I remember one screw up that could have been so bad, uh, but we lucked out. That was on the Seal River. That's in Manitoba. And I remember we were running, water was high, so we were running a lot of strings of some real big rapids. And we had full covers on our boats. And one of my friends was a real top-notch whitewater paddler. And, after you're leading for a while, you start getting kind of like, Jesus, because the responsibility of being first is always there. Okay. So I asked my friend Herb, I said, Herb, will you lead a while? He said, okay. So I dropped back to I don't know, dropped back to near the end, but there was 4 canoes, I think. So I was on number 3. And so we came around a bend, and all of a sudden I see Herb quickly ferrying over to river left. And all the canoes quickly following. And I'm looking ahead and say, what's going on? I don't see anything. What's going on here? And so they're all ferrying over to river left, and we're getting closer and closer. And then all of a sudden I see it. Falls right in front of me. So I yelled to Susie, back paddle hard. So we managed to ferry over to a pickup truck size boulder. So we're right in that eddy and the boulder. And the water is rushing both sides of us going over this falls. So we're sitting there for a long period. I'm going, I don't know what to do. I said, we can't back out of this. That we're too close to the falls. We're just going to go over. I said, we just might have to go over this falls. I don't know what to do. So we said, well, let's get out on this boulder and take a look. So we get out on the boulder, we pull the canoe up on it, and we walk over to the edge of it, fully expecting, oh God, look down. Oh my God. The run out goes on both sides. It's a nice eddy down there. And then the run out goes like that. Hey, it's all we have to do is pull this canoe over the top of this big boulder, hang on by the tail line, let her drop down in there, and then, Susie, you hold the boat, I'll climb down, and as soon as I get in there, I'll just back her up, and you can climb down, and we get in. So that's what we did. So we did, and we just floated right out the bottom, and then we waited 30 minutes for those guys to complete the portage around it. It was a real rugged, mean portage, so that was just pure luck. But stuff like that happens, I could go on. There's so many stories to tell, and you know. Yeah, this is going to be my last year of doing presentations too. I did one last show that I'm going to do. It's I have it put together now, and now I'm going to do that in the spring. It's going to be called My Last Picture Show, Remembering a Lifetime of Canoeing Wild Rivers. And it starts out from when I'm like 2 or 3 years old to how things got to be where they are today. So,
Cool.
but,
Maybe I'll have a hitch a ride with Kevin and come down to one of the shows and check that out. What is it? No,
yeah,
did they
come
change
down.
the name of it? It used
Yeah,
to be.
come
It was
down to
Quiet
San
Water Symposium, wasn't that?
It's called Quiet Adventure Symposium. It's a lovely show, and I think well, I don't think you're not that far from it in Toronto. It's in Lansing, Michigan. Okay,
Yep,
and
it's not that bad.
and it's just a 1 day show, and you would think that 1 day would be, not enough, but it actually is. And what's really kind of delightful about it is it's all volunteer show. It's not commercial. So everybody's, volunteered their time, and the emphasis is really on the love of wilderness and going safely and confidently. And yeah, there's stuff for sale. There has to be to support a show like that. But the real emphasis is on the camaraderie, and talk to Kevin about it. We always have, and then right after that, the week after that, we traditionally go to Canoe Kopi, and that's another big blast of a show too. That's a 3 day show. But it's for most people, it's you got trying to find a place to stay it's just so packed. They're both wonderful shows. But I think you would, since you're so close to Lansing, um, I think you guys might really, really enjoy it.
Cool.
Cool. But before you
As
do
it,
that, can I just say one last thing? Before you
Absolutely.
do, I do want to thank you and your countrymen, seriously, for the number of years that you allowed me to spend canoeing your wild rivers. I hope you can preserve them better than we preserved ours, because they're a legacy that 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 needs to last forever. But anyway, thank you. Go ahead.
You're so welcome.
all right, that's it for us for today. Thank you so much to our special guest, Cliff Jacobson, for joining us. And please do reach out to us if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out. You can always reach out to us anytime. You can email us at hi@supergoodcamping.com. That's hi@supergoodcamping.com. And we are on all the social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And subscribe to us there.
Oh, and Cliff, your website is cliffcanoe.com?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
check out Cliff at cliffcanoe.com. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.